Being a founder is like 10 times harder than being a VC by far. They're getting pushed out in the middle and they're all terrified. And every bad guy you beat, they send 2. You beat 2, they send 4. You beat 4, they start shooting arrows at you and there's tigers on chains and like guys on fucking chariots. It's a never-ending escalation into the walls of whatever your limitations are. You're just like constantly moving up that ladder. Being an investor is like we're just one of those douchebags in the stands drinking a beer, betting on who's going to live and who's going to die.
If you're going in there with eyes wide open and you're still doing it, then you're meant to be here and you're meant to build something great. And that's ultimately all we're looking for. Hey climbers, welcome back to another episode of Climb by VSC. My name is Jay Kapoor. I'm co-host of Climb and general partner of VSC Ventures. Every week on this show, I speak to founders, investors, and industry experts that are building and scaling the next generation of game-changing and category-defining companies. Today on the show, I'm thrilled to have on Zach Coelius, managing partner of Coelius Capital. Zach has invested in household names like AngelList, Cruise Automation, BounceX, HelloSign, Mercury, and so many more. Prior to investing, Zach built and sold an ad tech business to Facebook. And you started as an investor with AngelList Syndicate, so we can talk about that as well. And recently closed a $33 million Fund 2, Coelius Capital 2, in an unheard of 3 weeks. For context, our raise took 14 months. And you raised it all over Zoom. So much for us to dig into. I just want to start by saying thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great. It's been
such a cool space you got.
It's fun, right?
Yeah.
It's been a while actually since we've had a chance to talk. I was thinking back. I think last time we were talking was like Clubhouse during the peak pandemic days.
Oh yeah, that was such a hot moment. Like so magical.
I don't know if anything like that will ever come again.
I'm sure something's going to happen, but that was a special moment.
It was. Let's talk a little bit about kind of your journey as an investor. You started investing in startups after an operating career, building an ad tech most recently. It's been about a decade or so. So as you look back on that last decade, what has changed the most in how you are kind of approaching and sourcing and backing these companies?
Yeah, so I think it's, venture is such a weird job. It's, there's on so many different levels, but the time horizons between inputs and outputs. So you do something, you make an investment, and then figuring out if you're right or not is so long. It's very difficult to have an iterative cycle. Like you can't just sort of be like, do, watch, learn, repeat, fix. Like you kind of like you put these bets in the ground and then you try to help out, and then you wait a decade to find out if you're right. I like to say, like, when you're a founder, it's like you walk around with like an inverted pyramid of all the world's shit on your shoulders that you carry. I mean, everything, if the toilet breaks in the office, it's your responsibility. And so you have all this shit. You can see it all. You usually have a pretty good sense of what it is. It's all there. And you just like, you rank order it and you work against it and you solve it. And it's like very iterative. And like, you're constantly reminded how stupid and slow and bad you are at the job. And you just like, you bear that weight. And it's like, it's the hardest job in the world. Being a founder is like 10 times harder than being a VC by far. Anyone who says otherwise is lying. Being a VC is you sort of like, you wander through your day looking for interesting stuff, and people throw rocks at you, which are requests for time, like nonstop, endless. Everybody wants something all the time because you give away millions of dollars in exchange for a piece of paper. I mean, literally someone could write up a piece of paper saying, you now own XXX, hand it to me, and I would hand them millions of dollars, and we would think that was a fair trade. So obviously everybody wants the other side of that equation. And those requests for time, those rocks, like they hurt, right? It's just nonstop. And you're constantly getting barraged with those rocks. But some of those rocks might be diamonds. And so like literally you want them to throw those rocks at you because some of them might be diamonds. And then every now and then you get one and you look at it, you're like, I don't know. And you put it in your backpack and you carry that shit around for 10 years. And then in 10 years, you're like, oh shit. Or, whoa, look at that. Look, I mean, and it's such a weird job in that. And so I guess to answer your question, I don't fucking know. Like, I mean, I've learned a lot more. Okay. Like, I mean, the amount I've learned is unbelievable. The learning curve in this job is intense, but like, we'll see if like some of my very best deals, like my 2017 portfolio will probably end up being a 100x fund. And in 2017, I had no idea what I was doing. I mean, literally nothing. And so like, am I smarter? Am I dumber? I don't know.
Well, there's always that mix of luck and skill in venture, right? And I think you see that with a lot of investors that attribute the wrong one. And Like I had an investment in a company called Revel back when I was in my last fund in 2018. And if anybody told you that they're going to be a climate tech darling back in 2018, they're lying, because the founders didn't know, right? They built one business and kind of evolved it into a much, much bigger one 18 months later. And it's almost a sense of like, okay, was it luck or was it skill, or was it just backing the right person and betting that they're going to figure it out? Probably a combination of all three.
Yeah.
So it's hard sometimes to know what's what. And what I'll say is, like, it's also how long it takes to know whether it's working sometimes doesn't line up with the time scale of when a founder needs more money again. So looking back on some of those early investments, like, how soon after did you know, okay, this is going to be a massive home run?
I still don't know. I mean,
with cruise automation or with the HelloSign?
I mean, I guess the way I look at it is like, pretty quickly you realize if the founder is competent, and then you pretty quickly then can see, have they found, like, the way I like to think about it is like, I break the venture market into kind of like 3 stages. In the beginning, you sort of like, you wander into the forest with your friends as a founder. You get whatever resources you can get. So if you're like experienced, like, you get lots of stuff, you get a whole expedition to go into the forest. And if you're not experienced and you have no reputation, then you just, maybe you have a sandwich, and you're wandering around looking for gold. And that journey, like, is hard. Like, 'cause it's an exploration. You're searching for product market fit. You're searching for a market, a space, a place where you have incredible differentiation and where there's a big opportunity. And people are trying to kill you out there. You'll probably starve to death. The mosquitoes are endless. It's like the hardest journey in the world to find that. That's sort of like, you can think of like the pre-seed and seed market. That's what it is. It's a journey. You're trying to find it. And then if you find it, then basically what happens is what I see is that the business will inflect, and you go from where everything that was hard in the beginning, revenue, customers, traction, all actually suddenly becomes really easy. Like, it's like, very quickly, like, literally it will go from hard to easy. It will invert. And then everything that used to be easy, managing your team, managing your space, managing your catering, suddenly becomes really hard because everything's growing really fast. Like, so like in my business, we spent 7 years looking for product market fit. And it was like, it took us 7 years to get to $1 million in revenue, and it was brutal. And then we found it, and we went from $1 million to $30 million in revenue in 18 months. Like, just boom.
Yeah.
And that was just an unbelievable experience. And so when I look at any of these businesses, it's like, I can say, have they found it? Yes or no. If they found it, okay, can they actually scale it and not blow up the business? And I've seen that now a couple of times. It's very painful. So it's not clear that it's until the wire shows up, it's not clear to me that we have a good thing, because there's just it's literally like at every stage of the company is a new dice roll, and you can crap out at any time.
Well, and we saw a lot of folks that I think off of 2021 markups look really smart, look really good. My stuff looked really good, right?
Yeah.
And then you come back, what are we saying, 24-ish months later, and it suddenly doesn't anymore. And, I think from a DPI standpoint, which nobody thought about those 3 letters in 2021, it's suddenly becoming a bigger part of the conversation.
Big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, any idiot with a checkbook for the entirety of my venture career, me included, looked like a genius. Like, it was unbelievable. We were running 50+% IRR compounding for a decade. I mean, like you didn't have to squint very hard to draw the line and be like, oh, I'm gonna be a billionaire. And then 2022 happened. You're like, not right away.
Yeah. Talking about this perspective of finding product market fit and maybe not losing it, but not being able to scale with it. I mean, that's sort of a unique thing, because a lot of the founders that I have on this couch, and we're, really it's about talking about finding that product market fit. And once you found it, you feel like magically it's all solved. And what you're telling me is no, actually, now the next stage begins, the next hard step begins. What are the things that you see founders do wrong most often after they found that product market fit? Is it hiring? Is it, operations? Like, what are they doing wrong?
It's almost always people.
Really?
Yeah. Like, so the search for product market fit, that exploration process requires a very particular mindset and a certain team and a certain approach. And then once you find it, you almost, in the same way that the business inverts, you almost have to invert the people, in that, like, the people who are good at the first step of the discovery oftentimes struggle with the systemization that's required to scale, the professionalism that's required to basically scale, the focus that's required to scale. Because when you're exploring, you don't need to be focused. You want to go wander around and look for stuff. But like when you're scaling, you need to be incredibly focused. And so like you have to take this mental model and like put it in the trash can and then put on an entirely new mental model. And you have to take a set of skills and put those in the trash can and bring out a whole different set of skills. And so what ends up happening over and over again is the people fail. From the founder all the way down. It is like somebody's going to fail. And now, can they grow through it is usually a testament to how strong is the motor on that jet, like, or rocket. Like, you know, once it starts taking off, it's a rocket. And when the motor is strong, I mean, you can screw up a lot. When like there's so much demand, it'll just keep going. Like with my business, we were incredibly inexperienced in that growth period, but like we went from $1 million to 30 million and we had 300 million, like literally on the books. Like we were just like, woof, and like we were fucking up left and right. But it would have been fine if Facebook hadn't decided to like cut my belly open.
Yeah.
When you got a strong enough growth engine, you get to pretty much anything.
What are the best founders that you see, whether in your portfolio or your network, do early to try to navigate that chasm?
I mean, in almost everything in life, there's a yin and yang in that in founders, basically one of the biggest drivers to that yin and yang is between a sort of a confidence that borders on arrogance that allows them to charge through brick walls, because it's like the hardest. You have to do that over and over and over again. And that strength of character and fortitude to like charge through brick walls, and a humility to listen when someone's like, oh, you can walk around that brick wall. And like those two things are obviously in conflict with each other. And the best founders, when they hit those inflection points, they often find that if they're unbalanced or if they aren't smooth in their transitions between those two aspects of their personality, will get into trouble. Because in either direction, like you can really get messed up. For instance, like, some founders are really good at like asking questions and being very humble and really being thoughtful. And then what they find is that like no one gives them any attention when they're not winning. And so they usually only get authentic advice and feedback from people who really care.
Yeah.
But suddenly, as soon as they start winning, then every single motherfucker who wants something shows up and like starts glad handing and pissing down your leg and like, oh, you're the best. And those founders really struggle with maintaining the authentic, basically, direction of where they were going, because they were so open to feedback and thoughts. They start taking feedback and thoughts from people who are just basically looking to take advantage of them. And so you get into really bad problems with politics, and then you external investors, and like on and on and on. That is very problematic. And then the same thing goes in the inverse. So like,
if you're arrogant, you're not taking that feedback early enough, and now people that are well-meaning are not able to break through.
Yeah. Or you just like, when things start to break, you don't see the breakage because you're so arrogant and
you only hear your own voice.
Yeah.
So these are personality things, right? So as I think about, you're evaluating these founders, I know you have a very network-based approach, right? Most of your deals are coming from folks folks you've worked with, people you've kind of seen build. When they come to you, these are personality traits, nothing to do with the business, nothing to do with the market. How do you evaluate that in somebody to say, do they have the right mix of learning but also kind of conviction?
I think this is one of my favorite things about the job, is that there's an incredible amount of alpha in the art of this business. Like the sort of smushy human characteristics are probably the biggest defining element of this job. Like if I had to compete as a sharper spreadsheet jockey than the next guy at the table, I would be at the back of the pack. Like I would have no chance of competing. And then, but the personality traits and the dynamics that are really all about humans, which is where I spend all my time thinking about. I love humans, are by far they're just this endless source of exploration and learning. And also like, it really helps. You learn these skills and you're like, wow, like I'm better now at this job. And so, you're trying to suss out who the real person is as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm. You've described your process as finding the right people doing good things in big markets.
Right? Yeah, I want all of the above. So like, there's this constant debate in ventures, like, are you picking the horse? Are you picking the jockey? Are you pissing the market? And I'm like, obviously pick all of them.
Right.
Like, come on.
But you're getting hundreds of emails in your inbox from your network.
Yeah.
Which of the three stands out to you first?
I generally, even with the smartest founders, I will not invest. People I've known for a long time, I will not invest in dumb ideas and bad markets. Like I just don't love that. Like it's just too painful. And yeah, they sometimes go figure it out, but like they often don't.
When you say a bad market, you mean like a overly competitive, saturated market, or do you mean like, man, they haven't bought software in 20 years and I'm not going to do it for another 20? Like what's a bad market?
All of the above.
Yeah.
Like, like if you showed up and basically wanted to go after like, a highly competitive market that like there's a ton of people in, it's going to be really difficult for me to be smart enough about the approach and about the business and about the sector to be like, oh, I clearly think you're going to win. Like I have to find, for my own maybe ego or my own sense of like feeling like I'm adding value, I have to find an insight. I have to see the line. I have to be like, oh, that seems really novel, exciting, interesting, and new. And if I don't see that, it's very challenging for me to get excited.
Are there enough novel ideas out there today, or does it feel like most of the stuff has been tried?
Especially with AI.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, we're just starting over, right? Like, I actually haven't seen that many novel ideas with AI, but just like their unnovel ideas are actually relatively cool. Okay. So like, I feel like a kid in a candy store right now. It's like an endless menagerie of cool stuff.
And you're spending most of your time on B2B software, AI, vertical AI. I looked at, your portfolio. You've done stuff in kind of HR and hiring. You've done stuff in permitting and construction. What is it about vertical software that excites you, and vertical AI specifically that excites you?
So I think about the AI stack. I'm not smart enough to do the foundational stuff, so can't play there. I'm not technical enough to do the enabling layer. Like at the end of the day, like you've got to be a user of tools, and you have to spend time with like users of tools. Like, so one of my friends, one of the founders of Mint, his name is John Cini, and he runs a venture fund exclusively focused on dev tools. So tools, and I mean, the level that he plays at versus the level that I play at, maybe 100x delta. And so like, it's just like a reminder of like, I should not basically play in a world where like I'm 100x behind. It's like basically like whenever I go to a YC demo day, I look around the room and I'm like, am I the smartest person in the room on this subject? Because like for a couple things I am, I demonstrably am. But for 99% of the things, I'm like, no, definitely not. Yeah. And so with AI, that middle category and a lot of stuff, I don't play it. But I do have a lot of experience with basically the application of business software to business problems. In particular, the go-to-market aspect of that. So sales, marketing, positioning, strategy, that I have a lot of experience with that. And so there, in all these new applications, but in the application layer, I get excited because generally what I look for is what I say to a founder is like, until you can cold call a customer at 9:00 at night on their cell phone while they're putting their kid to bed, tell them what you do in one sentence. And instead of them saying, fuck you, they're like, oh, I want to talk to you tomorrow, which actually sounds really hard, but happens all the time. Like once you get to that stage, you find that basically like the customers actually want to talk to you because you're solving a real problem. You don't have it. But once you have that, you have everything. And what I'm finding with AI is all these companies suddenly a lot of them have that. Yeah. They're like, oh, here's this incredibly valuable, compelling thing that we're doing. Like the deal, the MetaView that I just invested in. It's a tool for interviewing, AI tool for interviewing job candidates. Seems super simple, but it turns out what they can do is they just extract every interview, all the information, all the data, and then push that into a centralized pool, and then they can work magic against that to share that information across the organization. And so like when you're looking at a candidate, you can see like every single interview that occurred, every question that got answered, every single way that they responded, and then you can start to really up-level basically your interaction layer. So it's like from a value proposition perspective, you never have to take notes again for every call. every recruiter's like, oh God, I want it, give it to me. Very simple articulation of value, but the actual value is this much deeper data layer that you can deliver value all across the org and do really, really powerful things. Hard to articulate in one sentence, but what makes the business valuable in the long term.
Yeah.
And like, go back 3 or 4 years ago and you told me recruiting software, I'd be like, heck no. Like, because they're like, the deltas are so thin. But now with AI, suddenly the deltas are very large.
Yeah. It's an interesting point you mentioned, like 3 years ago, you wouldn't have looked at, you wouldn't have been excited about that category. I see a lot of these ideas that I might have passed on 5-6 years ago coming back around with AI. And it's this challenge of kind of fighting your own instinct of being like, it didn't work before. Like I backed a company in architecture, loved the founder. This is one of those where like great founder, bad market. And that was, I thought they were going to overtake Autodesk and Revit. And, I was naive. But I'm seeing those things come back around now with AI. And I go, once burned, twice shy, right? There's this whole idea of decision-making frameworks of like, there's 3 centers in the body. There's the brain, the heart, and the gut.
Mm-hmm.
When you're looking at these ideas that are coming back around with AI, what's the hierarchy of brain, heart, and gut that gets you excited to go after these?
I try to stick with a core idea of the delta over the status quo, which is like unless what they're doing is demonstrably so much better that when that cold call happens, that like the person who answers the phone is like, yeah, I'm excited about this, then no. Like, and so it's like, I'm just searching for that delta. Once you find that delta, there's a whole bunch of other parts of the problem you have to figure out. Like, okay, how do we measure the differentiation? How do we think about the moats and all the other parts of the business? It's more of the brain part, the science business. But what I like to say is that there's like in the journey of these startups is there's a qualitative stage and a quantitative stage. Okay. In the qualitative stage, it's like you can articulate a crystallized vision for what that delta is. This is why we're better, and like this is clear, and it's like simple, and like you can poke on it and it doesn't fall apart. And then there's a quantitative stage, which is when it shows up in month-over-month metrics, and like then any idiot with a spreadsheet can extend the line and basically write the price, and like 15 VC firms will show up and compete for that bid, and like the deal's
You're trying to be the stage before that.
I want to front run them all day long. Yeah. Like if I'm not front running the like slow institutional VC partnerships that are run by committees, I'm a failure. So you just like sit there at that qualitative stage and you're trying to identify that delta over the status quo that gets the customers excited, and then you go in and you analyze it and figure out, is this an investable business?
Yeah. So coming back to this idea of the hint of product market fit, which I'm always trying to figure out, like, yeah, once you have a couple quarters of ARR or MRR at that point, there's something you can extrapolate, maybe, depends on how many months, and then at a certain point that deal gets bid up and it's out of our scope.
Yeah.
When you're looking for that hint, are you calling a customer? Are you calling market experts? I mean, what is that process of finding that hint that allows you to get to these deals before the Series A guys bid them up?
Yeah. I think the first step is simply in the articulation. Like, for instance, like when you're talking to an entrepreneur and you ask them what they do, when they've found it, they say, we do this. Period. Full stop. When they haven't found it, they say, we do this and the crystallization. So literally you go from this amorphous, smushy, very sort of like verbose value proposition to a structure, like literally a crystallized structure that is hard and that is solid. That crystallization occurs when they find the thing that is repeatable. And you see that when you see an entrepreneur pitching their business to the customers, if they change their pitch every time, they haven't found it, because that doesn't scale. Because the founder, that doesn't scale for you, and it definitely doesn't scale if you move it over to the sales team, and it doesn't scale through marketing. It's like you can't change your pitch every time and scale the business. But when you find it, then you literally can be like, so for instance, for my business, in the beginning, we were like an early competitor to Trade Desk. Now a $30 billion business, but we got just crushed. Like I was like a 25-year-old kid competing with guys my age, and they just kicked my ass. And like we didn't have the value proposition, and it was very amorphous, and like we didn't have so we got kicked out of the back of that pack. And then right before Facebook went public, they missed their Q4. because their ad platform was garbage. They didn't know what they're doing. And like I'd been banging on their door, being like, "Hey, let us buy your media. Let us use all the technology we built to buy your media." And they're like, "No." Then they missed their Q4. So then Zuck went to the ads team. Back then, it was like 25 engineers in the entire ads team, and he was like, "What are we gonna do, guys?" And they were like, "Well, here's some ideas." And he's like, "Do all of them." And one of those ideas was to let folks like us go and buy media on the platform. And like, I mean, literally, they just laid the opportunity on our plate, and it was just like, it was unbelievable. Antonio Garcia Martinez wrote this great book, Chaos Monkeys, about this whole journey, like this whole thing from his perspective when he was inside Facebook. And so, and at that point, you know, I'd been around the block now for 7 years. We'd pivoted 7 times in ad tech, always in ad tech, different customers, different products. And so like, it's like I had 7 ad tech startups. And so like at that point, I pretty much knew what I was doing. And I was like, okay, what is the thing that we can do using this opportunity, access to Facebook media, that is differentiated and that customers will really want? And we found it. And literally it was like dynamic, creative retargeting on Facebook. That was it. That's all we did. And we called up literally the customers who we'd been begging to talk to for years: Home Depot, Best Buy, Booking.com, TripAdvisor, like literally people who spend billions of dollars on media. And we were like, we get on the call and we schedule an hour. And me and my sales guys would have a race, because literally we get on the call and they'd be like, "Okay, what are you guys talking about?" And we're like, "Dynamic, creative retargeting on Facebook." And they'd be like, "Send us a contract." Like 3 minutes in, 4 minutes in, 5, like boom, boom,
You've
boom,
identified that pain point and articulated it that clearly.
and it's it. We were done. And it was over. And then it was just then all the other hard parts, like, you know, trying to navigate under Facebook while like effectively kill us. That became the hard part of the business. But that part, the discovery of the gold mine in the forest, we'd found it.
Yeah.
And then like when you find the gold mine, it's like, that's the gold mine. Full stop. And so in a lot of ways, it's about that. It's about that.
The question I struggle with sometimes is, how big is that gold mine, right? So as we see, you know, at our fund, I like to say we love the dirty, dusty, and dangerous industries. That's the category that, given our background as storytellers and content creators, we excel in, because typically those founders that are coming from concrete or coming from painting or coming from robotics don't tell their stories well. And if you can come help them do that, then therein lies your alpha, right? The challenge is, it's great for a fund of my size, probably great for a fund of your size, and then they have to turn around and go raise a Series A from a fund that's raised $250 million.
Yeah.
And they're looking at outcomes that haven't ever existed in this category of software, whether it's permitting and construction, or it's contractors, or it's, you know, manufacturing. How do you get comfortable with that, in the sense of, this is a great opportunity for me, but I don't know what the downstream market thinks?
Yeah. I mean, you got to remember, at the end of the day, we are risk capital. Like, and, you know, our risk comes in many different forms, but, you know, that's one risk that, like, I still don't know the answer to. You know, like, if you look at my portfolio, you know, I invested in like 80 companies over the last 9 years. I think we've had 3 go out of business. Like, it's just like incredible survivability. 0 pivots. Like, they all do effectively the same thing. But like, there's a bunch of TAM questions that are still there hanging over my head. And so when you asked me at the beginning, like, you know, are you good at this or not? I'm like, I don't know yet. Because like, there's a bunch of them where like the TAMs are like, you know, they're 100 million in revenue. Great. That's good sized business. Are they going to get to 500 million in revenue?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And so the science of the art and science of really trying to figure out a TAM is a big part of the risk of this business. And like, I wouldn't say that I've nailed that one. I've done well on it, but I don't feel as confident about that as I do about the, like, you know, I can tell when they found it.
Yeah, that I can smell, or competence of the product market.
I can smell it. I mean, you give me a founder, 2 minutes into it, I'll be like, oh, they got it. Like, yeah, right away. Because there's an expression of humanity when they have it that, like, it's
hard to fake.
Yeah, no, you can't fake it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And does that stay true when you're looking at across these different industries? Like, are there commonalities of product market fit across the industries, and what are the things that are more context dependent?
Yeah, definitely. To go back to one of your earlier questions, like, how do I figure this out? Like, for instance, like, one easy way to do it is, like, you know, I know a lot of people. Like, I'm a degenerate networker. I network like crazy. And, you know, and my AngelList syndicate's like 5,000 people now.
Yeah.
And they're like, they're all on my team. Like it's the best thing that ever happened to me is I have 5,000 super smart people who are literally like sitting at my shoulder for every investment I make, sending me deal flow every day. They're really good at pointing out when I'm being stupid. I mean, painfully good at it. And so like I do a deal or I'm looking at a deal and I can like send a note out to like a dozen people being like, hey, they do this. And like, unless they get excited, then that's not a thing. Like, but generally when they do get excited, they get excited quickly because it's differentiated for them and it's differentiated in general. And then it's like, oh, okay.
And these are folks who are prospective customers of software.
Yeah. So like for the recruiting thing, you know, it wasn't very hard to diligence. Like I pinged a bunch of people, be like, hey, what do you think? And everyone's like, yeah, this thing's awesome. And now they're like, you know, a lot of other questions that have to be answered about that business. But the part of like, do the customers get excited about it? Yes.
Yeah, totally. Repeat founders versus first-time founders. Let me pose it this way. You get a first-time founder with really strong founder market fit, knows the industry really well. Or you get a experienced founder building an industry they don't know. Which one do you take?
For my pre-seed work, the vast majority of my pre-seed work is with founders I've known for a long time. So like Kyle from Cruise, Ahmad from Mercury, those are folks who I'm like, you know, I've known them forever. And there I can just sort of be like, I'm lucky to be on that journey. Like they tell me they're starting a company and I'm like, I'm on board. Generally for folks I don't know, and generally those are first-time founders, I'm looking for basically that crystallization of value, that articulation of, oh, we found it. And there it's much less to do with like, you know, founder market fit. I don't really care yet because you got to demonstrate that you can find it. And that just seems to be a really unique aspect to entrepreneurs that some can do it and some can't.
Yeah. And in terms of how you support these folks, outside of obviously your large network that you're tapping them into for customers or intros or whatever, I mean, what else are you offering them? Are you being a board partner? You know, what's your relationship there?
I generally don't take board seats.
Okay.
I have a lot of opinions about boards, not all of them pretty. I like to be the call when shit goes wrong. And it's hard to be that call when you're the board because they always need to basically present to the board a very clean, concise, basically smooth vision of what's happening.
Yeah.
Most boards don't deal well with the choppy messiness of startups. And the boards never have the level of knowledge that they need to actually understand the details. So when I can be the person that they trust, then I get those calls. Sometimes I can maintain that trust, sometimes I don't. One thing I do a lot is I'll tell them when their baby is ugly. I'll tell them when they're fucking up. Like I'll be like, oh, you're making a mistake. Like, and it's interesting to watch over the arc of my relationship with entrepreneurs, you know, especially when they get into that overconfidence stage, they suddenly become very unreceptive to me telling them that they're not doing something right. They're like, what the fuck do you know? And often they're right, but like, you know, it's important to have that person at the table. And sometimes they suddenly don't want that person at the table anymore. And so, but yeah, I need to maintain the authenticity with them and I need them to maintain the humility with me that otherwise I can't provide a lot of value.
Well, let's get into some of those hot takes about the boards. I mean, what are most boards that you've been around or worked with doing wrong? Or where are they destroying value versus creating it?
I just think that like by definition, if you're a VC, you know, you're spending at best a couple % of your time on a business. And that the delta between that and the founder who's, you know, 150% of their time, probably 200%, if you think about the relative workload of VCs versus founders, like you're just not up to speed. Like you just don't know enough about the industry, about the company, about the dynamics, about all the details. You're incredibly ignorant. And as a result, it's just really difficult to make good decisions. Like you're just not informed enough. And unfortunately, you know, when everybody like basically like wants to kiss the ring and, you know, loves VCs and treats us like we're, you know, special people, you can very quickly get a very puffed up ego. Surprise, surprise. Arrogant VCs, never heard such thing. But yeah, you can. And then that dynamic is really destructive. And it doesn't have to be the board. It could just be like one person on the board. And that person can be very destructive. I think back to these boards is that like, you know, when ventures is because these iteration cycles are so long, like we can't really sort of like learn from our mistakes rapidly. It takes like a decade. So it's a business driven by tribal knowledge, which is like, oh, here's what worked 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And then like, if you think about the separation between the LPs and the GPs, it's even more tribal in that the LPs just don't have a lot of visibility into all the details. And so boards are one of these examples, which was 30 years ago, being a really experienced entrepreneur or a really experienced board member, like that was a material difference for a company, because like most boards back then really sucked. There wasn't a lot of information. It wasn't shared well. The deltas between the best boards and the worst boards was huge. And so like you as a GP could go find a company, join the board, and deliver real value to drive that company to a great place. Super awesome difference. And so they sold all the GPs on the LPs on that idea, which is we are VCs, we take board seats because we can drive value, and therefore that's how we win. And the LPs were like, great. But then 30 years later, that tribal knowledge is still the same in the industry. And now the boards, the deltas between the boards, as far as I can tell, is de minimis. Yeah. Like they all generally suck at pretty much the same rate. And like very few of them are extraordinary. Almost none of them are extraordinary. And as you add more members, they just start to break apart and become this like messy thing. And so now the value that you're driving as a board member, the delta over your competition versus other board members or other companies is non-existent. But the time suck is incredibly huge. And you have this ignorance problem. So yeah, I'm on boards. I understand how they work. They generally suck. It's like democracy. It's literally the worst freaking way to go about doing anything, except there's no better alternative.
Right.
Like, yeah.
How late should a founder wait until they invite this chaos into their lives? When should they go and set up a board? Is there a stage of funding? Is there an ARR threshold? Like, when does it make sense?
I mean, it really comes down to the humility of the founder. The founders who listen well, I'd say never. Like, because you can have advisors, you can have your investors,
cabinet, you know.
Yeah, and you can create a dynamic where you interact and it's mutually beneficial, and it's not a whole bunch of corporate governance, kabuki. But a lot of founders, sometimes they need a strong hand there. There is real value in corporate governance. Yeah, so
I think there's a signaling piece of it too. So our fund one, we don't take any board seats. We don't lead. Fund two, we may start dabbling in it, right? As your AUM grows, it kind of necessitates more ownership, and as ownership grows, it necessitates having board positions.
Yeah.
So I'm not immune or ignorant of that fact. But at least the nice thing in fund one is we don't have that. But it does always send a strong signal to me when an investor that I know and trust is saying, I'm voting with not just my money but my time.
Yeah.
And I'm choosing to be on the board of this company. And it's almost like that extra, Mario Kart boost signal, which is like, okay, like you really want this company to succeed. Other than that, I'm not always sure what it's signaling externally for an investor to take that board seat.
Venture is such a performative boondoggle in that, like, because the inputs and outputs are 10 years away, that venture investors are largely just like they're dancing to show everyone how smart they are and how differentiated they are, and like it's a giant basically facade of performance, because like you just can't wait until the outcomes to be like, oh look, I was right, because you got to raise funds, and if you like think about it like a venture partnership, you're raising funds on 1, 2, 3 year cycles, but the outcomes take 10 years, and if you get dropped from the fund, you're dead. So like, and your chance of getting a career after that is over. So you literally just got to spend all this time basically like performing to your partners, so they keep, and the LPs, so they keep you in the fund. And like, and a lot of that behavior leads to really bad outcomes. And so like board seats is a great example of that, which is like, I'm on the board of this company. Yay. I'm like, and then when the company's winning, you're like, I'm a board member. That makes me awesome. Well, yay. And like, and there's just like, there's this constant push amongst VCs in order to get those status signals that will enable them to remain relevant and to basically not get ejected from the fund. And so I think from just an incentive of the industry's perspective, it's pretty fucking broken.
Yeah, I'll tell you how we get around it. So because we handle the PR and go to market for all of our companies, I tend to find stuff out before the board does, because the board meets every 3 months.
Yeah.
But if I'm doing, you know, our team is doing your launch, then we're going to know, by the way, let's not talk about this. Wait, why not? What's going on there? And sometimes, like, I'm the one informing the board lead. I'm like, hey, by the way, we should talk about this thing, because they're skirting it. Again, I think you can have that when you're not the board member of record.
Yeah,
you exactly. Can be that friend when there's no, you know, the board. One of my mentors used to say the board has 2 jobs: fire the CEO, hire the next CEO. And it's like, if that's the power that they have vested, it almost necessitates that they can't just be your friend.
Yeah, the CEO is definitely not going to basically just show up and like, woo, here's my open kimono with the board. In fact, the opposite, which is like, here's my kimono, look how beautiful it is. Like, because they're that ignorance, the ignorance sort of awareness delta is so huge that, like, you have to be very careful of navigating. It's like you're navigating with someone who just, like, doesn't know what the fuck they're talking about.
Yeah,
and, like, you just have to be very careful with that.
You've talked about the fact that, at least in your venture career, timing has been everything.
Don't luck with my friend.
Yeah, getting all of the deals that you saw, or raising your fund. Is there something that I could do to position myself for better timing, or is that just it happens when it happens?
You find out, you let me know. I have no idea. I mean, timing is the magic of this business. I mean, in fact, it's all about timing. You know, I think the one thing that I basically push for is having the flexibility to be able to say yes.
Okay.
So if you're on a dozen boards, you're done, right? You don't have the flexibility. And so if you go out and you basically, like, establish all this infrastructure or all of this, like, these accoutrements of being a VC that suddenly basically prevent you from, like, recognizing a new opportunity, shifting all of your time and energy to it, and basically running with it, you're not going to be in a position to go win when the moment occurs. And so, like, the way my strategy is to basically, like, to operate with a very light backpack and very little else, and just basically be able to move quickly to jump on the thing.
Yeah.
Whereas structure and team and all of the infrastructure very quickly can become, a huge impediment to.
So you're like a solo GP in the true sense of the word. Like, there's no junior team, there's none of that. It comes to your inbox and you make the decision, and that's it.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. What's the flip side of that? Is that limit the amount of volume that you're able to process?
Yeah. So when you're solo, the biggest weaknesses are you don't have a bunch of people building the same brand. So think about the entire team that is over at one of these big venture funds building the venture fund brand, and entrepreneurs that care about brand. Like that is a validation of their work. It's a validation to their parents, to their peers, to their customers. And so, like, brand of your investor matters a lot. And so, like, I got to build my brand by myself, as opposed to, like, a firm where you've got 100 people all executing against the same vision. That's a real difference. I don't have anyone pointing out when I'm being stupid. Humans are fallible. I'm especially fallible. And so, like, I don't have anyone basically with skin in the game who's there to basically, like, be like, no, that's dumb as hell. That's a downside. On the other side of the equation, like, if you think about all the risk capital sort of, like, other sectors, they all basically revolve around individuals making decisions and being responsible for decisions. They're not about committee decision making. Venture, for a very particular reason, venture is a committee decision making infrastructure, and this is a business where all the money gets made with basically the nonconformist crazy ideas. That's so
the outliers.
So the outliers basically make all the money, and yet we have basically, like, groupthink driven decision making. Dumbest fucking thing ever.
Yeah.
And that's largely because when venture formed in the beginning, all the capital came from these big LPs. The big LPs basically were like, we want to write $20-30 million checks. We don't want to write lower checks. So the fund had to be a certain size. In order to get sufficient diversification, you had to have a certain number of positions. In order to basically sit on boards, which you needed to do back then, you needed to have a bunch of partners who could then buy enough, basically 10, 20, 30% positions in enough companies to build a large enough, basically diversified portfolio. And once you got a bunch of partners, nobody trusts each other because it's a 10-year outcome cycle. So everybody wants to make sure that you're not wasting the firm's money. So everyone's got to be there to the decision. Boom, committee is formed. And so, like, I mean, I can beat those fools all day long, every day. So you look at, like, the solos who are out there. I mean, Daniel Gross just led Perplexity's round. I mean, you look at Elad, you look at what Orange Zeb's doing, Lockheed's doing. I mean, as a class, like if you take all the solos and you basically just take our returns, I guarantee you we are beating the big firms by a large margin.
Well, the data proves that out too. There was in December, HBR put out a review of, I think, manager performance, and what they found was the earlier stage a deal, the more asymmetric decision making makes sense, and the later stage of deal, the more consensus makes sense. And I tend to find sometimes it's actually the inverse, because somebody at the later stage writing a $50 million check bangs the table because that's the one deal they're going to do that year and they don't want to lose it.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's actually the inverse, where we saw that with Tiger and Cotu and some of these, mega crossover funds where people wrote very, very, very large checks and it was that one person.
Yeah.
And if you look at that one person doesn't work there anymore. So there's that challenge of it too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a hard business. It is. I mean, this is not the competition and the complexity of the decision making and the problems in this business are super hard.
I'll close on this question because I tend to find that our listeners enjoy it a lot. What's a piece of advice that you give often to your founders but doesn't get taken often enough?
It's a good question. I don't know if this is my answer. Maybe I'll come up with my answer while I'm giving you this example. But I'm just finishing Annie Duke's new book, Quit. And I think it's probably one of the most important books for entrepreneurs to read, which is that like you get incredible path dependency in this business, and you get your ego and your status and your very essence, it gets commingled with the company and the direction of the company and the endeavor that you're working on. And in the beginning, that's like a very wholesome commingling, but the pressure, it causes it to twist and deform and become pretty gnarly by the end of the company's life. And it makes it very difficult to make intelligent underwriting decisions about when to stop, when to stop a company, when to stop a product, when to pivot, when to make changes, and like trying to figure out how to unlock your brain from that twisted, gnarled mess that is, being a founder of a company, and being able to try to get to a place of more objectivity is one of the hardest challenges as being an entrepreneur. It was weird. Like, so when my company, when we sold it, I was standing in this like parking lot up in Oregon. My mom was in the hospital. It was like a super bad moment. And I got the call and we're done. We signed, we sold, the wire ran out. And literally it was like this curtain that had been surrounding me, that the world as I thought it was had been projected upon. It's like it fell. And all of a sudden I saw the world as it actually was. And like in this one moment. And I was like, holy fuck. Like the world just totally opened up for me in a way that I'd never saw before. And I think every founder goes through that. I think the delusional nature of humanity, we're all by definition delusional the way our brains work. It gets even worse as you get twisted in that gnarled sort of intertwined nature of startups. And so I don't think that they don't have objectivity because they don't want to. I think they don't have objectivity because it's very hard. But I do think that that's like one of the most important things for entrepreneurs, to figure out how to somehow maintain some objectivity, how to give yourself the ability to see outside of that world that you construct for yourself.
And I think it comes back to your point of having a trusted circle around you. It doesn't have to be a board, but somebody that can tell you, hey, this isn't working. And, there may not be another chance to pivot or get around it.
Yeah.
Let's take your time, your energy, your brain power and apply it to something that could work. And it's hard because sunk cost fallacy is a real thing. And if you've been working at something for 24, 36, however many months, maybe years, it is hard to just step away from it because there might be that spark, but it's not enough to light something.
It's so hard.
Yeah.
It's so painful. Or just to make a change, like just the basic thing of like, you got to fire that person because this is not working. And they're like, it's really hard. It's the hardest job in the world. I have this analogy that I love to use. Someone stole it once, but like literally they repeated it word for word on a podcast. But like this is mine, which is that like there's a movie, the movie Gladiator, Russell Crowe. So early in the movie, they're all the slaves are taken to the base of this this like shitty arena, and they're getting pushed out in the middle, and they're all terrified because like on the other side of that is a guy with a battle axe who's going to chop them in half, and they know that, which is a scary thought. Imagine like that door, we go through that, there's a guy with an axe who's going to cut us in half, like, and so they're like grabbing whatever weapons they can grab, and like they're just like they're ready to go out that door, and they're just fucking terrified, and then they get pushed out the door. And being an entrepreneur is sort of like that. You grab whatever weapons you can grab, you grab whatever friends you can grab, and you get pushed out in the middle of the arena, and you just fight, and you sweat, and you bleed until you exit or you die. Because it's like, and every bad guy you beat, they send 2. You beat 2, they send 4. You beat 4, they start shooting arrows at you, and there's tigers on chains and like guys on fucking chariots. It's a never-ending escalation into the walls of whatever your limitations are. You're just like constantly moving up that ladder. And it's, being an investor is like we're just one of those douchebags in the stands drinking a beer, betting on who's going to live and who's going to die. Yeah, it's that's my favorite analogy for this.
I'll leave it on a more hopeful note, which is the important thing is to know what you're getting into, right? And I think if I'm taking anything away from that story, it's not saying, well, it's dark because at every stage there's just a different challenge and it went from chariots to tigers to whatever else. It's that if you're going in there with eyes wide open and you're still doing it, then you're meant to be here and you're meant to build something great. And that's ultimately all we're looking for. So we'll leave it there, Zach. This has been really, really fun. Enjoyed digging in all this with you. I think we explored a lot around product market fit that we haven't done on the show before. So grateful to you for sharing your time and experience with us.
Thanks for having me. This has been super fun.
Well, that's it for this week's episode of Climb by VSC. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Thanks to my guest, Zach Coelius, for joining me on the show today. Did you know that you can watch as well as listen to every episode of Climb? We're on YouTube now. We put out episodes every Wednesday, and we put out new clips every single day, so you could just keep scrolling forever. If you really like this episode, we'd love for you to leave us a 5-star review. And if you love this episode, recommend a guest to us. We'd love to have them on the show. Well, that's all for now. Thank you so much for joining me on Climb by VSC. We'll see you all next week.